An ANC task team has been set up to help the party process recommendations made by the State Capture Commission. The governing party is under pressure to act on the findings against senior members, including former President Jacob Zuma, NEC member Nomvula Mokonyane, and current chairperson Gwede Mandashe. The State Capture Commission has recommended that they face criminal investigation in relation to bribes that were allegedly paid by Bosasa in exchange for government contracts. Let's talk about the latest developments then with former Public Protector Professor Thuli Madonsela. Very good afternoon to you, Prof. Thank you for your time on this Sunday. Just as someone who's been involved in this process from the very beginning, how much further do you think what we've read so far as the inquiry's findings, how much further has that moved us as a country in understanding state capture and how far it went?
Well, thank you, Tembekile, for this privilege and greetings to people. The reports that have been issued by the State Capture Commission have helped us immensely to understand both the depths of corruption and the depths of state capture. I must indicate that I have a different definition of state capture than the one that informed President Zuma when he expanded the terms of the commission. When somebody pays to be given a tender and they have a permanent relationship to get tenders, for me that's not state capture, that's just grand corruption. It becomes state capture when there's control, where the fortunes of the person inside the system depend on the person outside. So state capture involved literally hijacking state structures and the people in the state and controlling them. In other words, in a state captured situation, you don't have an option but to dance. And if you don't dance, you're out, as you saw with Themba Maseko and many others who refused to dance. Whereas grand corruption would just mean somebody keeps paying you, and we saw bribe packs and things like that. But in terms of the criminality of both are criminal. The difference, though, is that state capture is more pernicious in that not only are you losing money, you're losing democracy. There is no democracy. So the people think they're electing people into parliament to determine laws and policies, and they're not doing that.
Prof,
the hijackers are doing it.
Let me ask you this question then, just on that point. You're saying there's a difference between capturing the state and corruption. And I wonder if it is perhaps easier to prove the corruption because there's a flow of money that one can trace versus actual capture, because then that's when you run into issues where people say, well, I don't recall that instruction, I don't recall that conversation.
You may be right, Temekile, but I do think both are difficult to prove, because with corruption, the fact that I got presents from you per se does not prove corruption. You have to prove that that gratification was an inducement for me to make a decision that favors you and make that decision in a manner that is dishonest.
And on that point then, that's been, hasn't it, the defense by the ANC chairperson Gwede Mandashe, who says when he did get those security upgrades at his homes in the Eastern Cape and Gauteng from, I believe, Papale Shabane it was, who worked at Bosasa, that was assistance from a close family friend and not the greasing of his palms so that he could use his influence as the then SG of the ANC to get deals for the company. Well,
I think you have to tackle that problem from two fronts. One would be the ethics, the executive ethics codes, whether the minister there played any role in favoring Bosasa, and even if we cannot prove that there was gratification for changing the decision, we can at least prove unethical conduct. But if you are going to prove that he was corrupt, you have to make a link between the decision so you'd have to place him at a point where he was a decision maker and that he made a decision he wouldn't have made but for the inducement or the gratification.
And do you think then that's where the prosecution element or the investigations which now have to be conducted, is that where it's going to hit a snag, proving that the installations, the security installations, the groceries, the money was indeed given with the intent to get a government contract?
Well, ideally now that's going to be the work of the prosecution in a proper well, I would say no, let me not use that language. I would say, according to the Mail and Guardian judgment against the Public Protector, the investigation should do all of that and leave the case at the point at which it can be prosecuted. But I can understand, because of the vastness of the scope for the State Capture Commission, some of these matters will be left for the prosecution to reinvestigate.
And the Jacob Zuma Foundation has responded. It says that the report by the Commission is not even worth the paper that it's written on. Is that, do you think, an indication of just how fierce the fight back is going to be, that it's going to be a long way until anyone is actually standing in the dock facing any kind of charges?
Absolutely, and therefore civil society organizations can help by simply reducing the decisions of this commission into small bites. Just little bites, booklets that are saying this is what the commission says and this is what happened, so that the ordinary Gogo Dlamini or Mr. or Mrs. Average, to borrow from Chris Hani's language, gets to know that there was criminality here. Because there's no doubt that there was criminality. It's just a question of making an ordinary person understand how this happened. But secondly, what does it mean to Gogo Dlamini? What does it mean to Mr. and Mrs. Average? If money is stolen from the state so that the Guptas and their friends can live these luxurious lives that they're not entitled to, that means there's less money for the people of South Africa to build roads, schools, hospitals, and everything that is promised by our Constitution.
I'm curious about the weight of the findings and recommendations in this report in law. Yes, it's an issue that's been discussed before, but I'm asking it now in the context of the response from Gwede Mandashe, who said, well, everything said about him is based on assumptions and that there isn't, quote unquote, a solid link to him and corrupt dealings or bribery with Bosasa.
Well, we'll have to look at the commission. Obviously, if you read the report more extensively, it will indicate what evidence does it have. And obviously, it's not enough to say so and so said this. You need more evidence than that. And I don't want to say the minister is right or wrong, but my experience as an investigator is people always deny that it happened. And therefore it becomes important that the report provides solid evidence that shows how it happened and when it happened.
And President Ramaphosa has until about, I think, winter this year, that's June, when he will then have to report back to Parliament on how government is basically going to be processing this report and the recommendations that come from the process, right? But I wonder if we're in a position now where it's clear how this country is going to prevent a repeat of the state capture years, instead of just reporting back on action to be taken against implicated persons, which is still very much the focus.
I believe that the president will report on both what he has done and what he plans to do, because that's the wording in the Executive Members Ethics Act, that the president has to report to Parliament ordinarily within 14 days on what he has done in implementing the decisions of the Public Protector and what he plans to do. And I suspect that he will do the same. But also he will probably just give a report on what other agencies within government are doing, because it's not the president's job or duty to prosecute. If he gets involved in who gets prosecuted and when, that's when democracy would be interfered with. So his is just to make sure that whoever has to do certain things, they do what they have to be done. They do what must be done without fear, favor, or prejudice, and without lacking in resources.
How plausible a suggestion, an idea would it be to say that perhaps in South Africa there should be an outright ban, so to speak, on politicians receiving gifts, money, favors, lavish favors such as security installations, groceries worth thousands of rands altogether in order to avoid a repeat of what we're dealing with?
I'm 100% in favor of that approach. I mean, already our politicians get far more than other people. For example, they get accommodation. Nobody else gets accommodation, even if they have to work away from home. And they get that. They get flights, etc. There's absolutely no reason why they should get gifts from the public. Also, because these gifts become inducements. People feel that if I don't give a gift, then I won't get anything. I mean, as a public protector, it was just, our approach was no gifts. No gift from anybody whose case we are involved in. No gift whatsoever.
Professor Thuli Madonsela, former Public Protector, thank you so much for being on the program this afternoon.